So welcome back, everyone, where we're looking at the acid-alkaline balance in the body. And I mentioned when we looked at the liver that at our health retreat we do the first 2 days of juicing. Well, the guests come in Sunday, but Monday, Tuesday is the juicing day. And all of those juices are alkaline. Because in the body, as we looked at when we went on our journey through the gut, the only part of the body that should be acid is the stomach. But all body's waste that comes out is acid. And you remember when we looked at cancer, cancer thrives in an acid environment. So that explains some of the reasons why these people that Walt was talking about with cancer were getting such remarkable results because of the juices creating an alkaline environment. And cancer can only thrive in a very acid environment. Now, if I went on juices for a month, I'd be a stick. If I turned sideways, you wouldn't see me. I lose weight very, very quickly. So it's also an illustration of you've got to do what works for you. So what about the acid-alkaline? So the acid-alkaline balance in the body, we're going to have a look at this acid-alkaline on the pH scale. So what does pH mean? When you dissolve acid in a solution, it gives off hydrogen ions. When you dissolve alkaline in solution, it gives off hydrogen ions. So pH basically means potential hydrogen, potential hydroxy. So up one end, we've got alkaline, and the reading is 14. Up the other end, we've got acid, that's 0. Right in the middle, we've got neutral. A neutral is neither acid or alkaline, that sits at 7, or water should be. Now, there are some ladies here who are bringing me some lovely spring water, and it would be, I wouldn't be surprised, it would be slightly on the alkaline side. We have water at our retreat that is sourced from underneath the creek bed, so you could say it's spring water. And we had a lady with the testing equipment attend our program, and she said, "Your water out of the tap is alkaline." She said, "I have never seen alkaline water coming out of a tap." You see, we don't put any fluoride or chlorine in it because they both bring the water to a little acid. And I do hear that Robert Kennedy Jr. is looking at getting fluoride out of your water. Is that right? Now, my husband has a political party in Australia. It's called HEART, Health, Environment, Accountability, Rights and Transparency. And he had the great privilege of speaking with Robert Kennedy Jr. about 2 years ago. Now, this man is an ethical man. In fact, he talks about all the others. And he said, "I went to university with these guys. I know what they're after. Power and money. I guess we all know that." So we are glad that there's a man up there who's interested in health. And he's got an uphill battle. If you're a praying person, I hope you are, pray for that man. Blood has a reading on the pH scale. And blood's reading on the pH scale, it sits between 7.35 and 7.4. And all blood will sit within that scale. There's no need to have a blood test to see what your pH is because it will all be in that scale. Because if blood pH goes up to 8, then the person can go into a coma and die of alkalosis. And if blood pH drops down to 7.22, that person can go into a coma and die of acidosis. So there can't be much variation there. And we don't have to worry about the pH of our blood because there are two organs that are constantly keeping the pH of the blood within that range. One is your lungs. Have you noticed when you walk up hills? We couldn't walk up hills this morning because it was pouring rain. But when you're walking up hills or you're doing your 30 push-ups, so I did my 30 push-ups this morning, you start to breathe differently. And we don't choose to breathe differently. You breathe differently because the more you work your body, the more fuel is being burnt, the more carbon dioxide and lactic acid is being given off, and so the blood pH starts to get a little acid, 7.34, 7.33. The brain says to the lungs, breathe deeply, because when we breathe in deeply, we breathe in more oxygen, and oxygen alkalizes. And we're breathing out more waste. So when you're sitting right here, you're breathing in 500 mil, you're breathing out 500 mil. When you get to the top of that hill, you're breathing in 3,600 mil, and you're breathing out 3,600 mil. And so that's why your breathing changes when you start to move that body. It's the brain's way of helping to keep that blood in the right pH. The other organ is the kidneys. And the kidneys balance the pH of the blood in a fascinating way. Proverbs 14 verse 6, knowledge is easy to him that understands. Let me show you. Here is the kidney. This is one kidney, and it has little filtering units all on the edge. It's called the cortex. And then in the middle, in the medulla, there are little tubules. Going into the urethra, there's the ureter from the other kidney into the bladder, and then the urethra is where the urine comes out. So let me magnify this little filtering unit. And we have approximately 1 million filtering units in one kidney, and our kidney is about as big as our fist. So here are the tubules coming out, and those tubules go down and into the bladder. So this little filtering unit is called the Bowman's capsule. It has all these little filters in it. So the blood goes into the filtering unit, and the blood vessel coming in is a bit thicker than the blood vessel coming out. And what that does is that builds up pressure in the filtering unit to be able to filter a little bit more effectively. In a 24-hour period, we filter 1,800 litres of blood. Now, we don't have that much blood, but every 2 minutes, 1.2 litres is being filtered. Out of that 1,800 litres of blood, 180 litres, and in your reckoning, a litre is the same as a quart, so four glasses. Out of that 1,800 litres of blood, 180 litres of filtrate is being filtered out. But we only urinate out 1.5 litres in a 24-hour period. So where's the rest? That's a shortfall of about 160 litres. There's a reabsorption. So there's a reabsorption in this area here, in these tubules. And this is where pH is being balanced. Let's say the pH of the blood is going too acid. It's picked up here, it's monitored here, and extra acid is released into the tubules to be urinated out. But let's say the pH of the blood is going too alkaline. It is here that extra acid is pulled out of the tubules back into the blood. And that's why the kidneys play a very important role in balancing the pH of the blood. So we don't have to worry about the pH of our blood. The kidneys do a couple of other things in this reabsorption area. They are also monitoring and balancing, if necessary, the sodium and water levels in the body. They are also monitoring blood pressure. That's why if someone has compromised kidney function, often their legs swell and their blood pressure goes up because the kidneys are greatly compromised and they're unable to help balance that. So your kidneys are an amazing organ, not only filtering your blood, but also playing a very important role in what's often called homeostasis, or balancing different body systems. But what we're particularly looking at now is the way the kidneys help to balance the pH of the blood. pH of the blood cannot change, as you can see, but the pH of the cell can. So the pH of the cell, it should sit at 6.5, very slightly acid, and there's a reason for that. The most acidic substance is sulfuric acid, and on the scale of speed, sulfuric acid, it travels at the speed of light. The most alkaline mineral is calcium, and on the scale of speed, calcium doesn't even move. This explains why the hydroponic gardener is constantly testing the water that the roots of his plants are sitting in, because if the water goes too acid, the roots burn. If the water goes too alkaline, he doesn't get the speed of uptake of minerals out of the water and into the plant. If you've ever had a swimming pool, you have to test the pH of your water every morning, because if the water goes too alkaline, algae grows on the pipe. If it goes too acid, the pipes corrode. So just as in the swimming pool, just as the hydroponic gardener, this precision balance is important, how much more in the human body? And you can see that God, in his wisdom and mercy, arranged for the lungs and the kidneys to keep the balance. But what about the cell? That's where we have a lot of say over. So disease thrives in a cellular pH of 5.5. And when we looked at cancer on Tuesday, we looked at how cancer thrives in an acid environment. So this is where cancer thrives, in the 5.5, and this is why those people were having such remarkable results that Walt was relating to us, being on the juices. This is where fungus thrives, in a 5.5 environment. And by the way, something that is, I'm sure, not drunk in these circles, but in some circles, people drink Coca-Cola. Where does Coca-Cola sit? Coca-Cola, it sits at about 2.6. It's a killer. Have you looked at the advertising campaign around Coca-Cola? It's magnificent. And you know why? Because that's all they've got. That's all they've got. Yes, it can clean the battery terminals. So what we're going to look at is what influences this cellular pH. And by the way, a gardener aims for a soil pH of 6.4. It is true that different vegetables thrive in slightly different pHs, but overall, that's what the gardener is aiming for, a soil pH of 6.5. Interesting to note that the soil pH and the cell pH, very similar. The Bible says in Genesis 3:19, we come from dust, we go back to dust, we're dust. Very similar. Even though there's only the drop of 1 point from 6.5 to 5.5, it has a dramatic effect on the body, because that drop of 1 point, it's logarithmic, that drop of 1 point means 60% less oxygen available at the cellular level. No wonder cancer thrives in that area. So you can do much to conquer disease, prevent disease, by knowing how you can maintain a better pH cellular balance. That's what we're going to look at. This might surprise you and it might not. Sunshine. If you lay in the sun too long and get burnt, that's creating a very acid, inflammatory environment in the body. But most people are guilty of not enough sunshine. Just the right amount of sunshine. How do you know what the right amount of sunshine is? Your skin will tell you. We should be ideally getting sunshine every day. It looks like it's peeping out again out there. Use of water. Water alkalizes. I don't know anyone that drinks too much water. Walt Cross, he mentioned Dr. Schultz, Dr. Richard Schultz. He was one of Dr. Christopher's star students. And Dr. Christopher said, there is a sign to see if you're drinking too much water. Put your head on the side, and if the water comes out your ears, you're drinking too much. In other words, it's almost impossible not to drink. I mean, it's almost impossible to drink too much. Most people don't drink enough. But just the right amount of water alkalizes. Again, dehydration causes an acid environment in the body. Sleep. Too much sleep, not enough sleep. Both can create an acid environment in the body. Just the right amount of sleep. Trusting God. I think this is not a surprise to most people that stress, anxiety can create an acid condition. And we have a choice. We have a choice between faith and fear. And many people who are in fear, it's creating they're stressed out. That's why God said, 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, I've not given you the spirit of fear. If there's anything that you're stressed about, have a good look at it. Because we serve a solution God, and He has a way through it. Just leave it with Him. And that's why the Bible says, take no thought of tomorrow. It's got enough worries of its own. We've just been given today. And you know, if you have that attitude, I've got today, and thank God. 1 Thessalonians 5:18 says, in everything give thanks. For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. That's how I cope with being away from my home for 9 months of the year. I'm very thankful for where I am. I'm so thankful for this magnificent place that I'm staying in. I've got this huge bed that would fit about 4 of me in it, and it's all big solid wood. I'm so thankful I can open my window. I'm so thankful for these beautiful trees. Just look for all the things you can be thankful. It just has a calming effect on the body. But let me give you a beautiful alkaline Bible verse. It's found in Isaiah chapter 26 verse 3. God will keep him in perfect peace. He whose mind is stayed on God because he trusts in God. That alkalizes. Abstain. Yes, there are some things that people are taking into their body that are creating an acid environment. So what I'm going to do is have a look at what we've already done, abstain. I'm going to have a look at what causes an acid environment in the body. We're also going to have a look at what creates the alkaline. And by knowing and understanding that, we can do a lot to creating this 6.5 environment, which is what our cells should be. It's probably not a surprise that the most acid-forming food that can go into our body, I hesitate to even call it a food, is the pure crystallized acid that's extracted from the sugarcane plant. I used to make my children dessert a couple of times a week. I never gave them sugar. I would make apple pies, I would make lemon pies, I'd sweeten them with coconut sugar. Coconut sugar or palm sugar is totally different because it's just the crystallized nectar from the palm flower. It's not refined. Or I'd use a little honey, or I'd use a little maple syrup. I did not give them sugar. I think that's one of the reasons, one of many, but it's one of the reasons why they had strong teeth. Creates a very acid environment in the mouth that can help to break down the dentine in the teeth. I have seen some little children whose teeth are rotting before their second teeth come through. And it's got a lot to do with what they're eating. Also, meat, as I mentioned this morning, when it breaks down, when it's metabolised by the liver, only 58% is used as fuel. That's a 42% waste. And the waste is a sulfur waste. The sulfur is an acid, I don't know if that's right. Doesn't look right. Sulfur, phosphorus is also an acid mineral, as is chlorine. So on this list here, we've got the acid, these are high in the acid minerals. Aged cheese, what's the blue in the blue vein cheese? It's mould. But there's a difference here. On the pH of 7, you've got fresh cheeses like feta, ricotta, your freshers. But of course there is a problem with those cheeses if the cows are not healthy. And I know some people, they eat goat or sheep feta. They can be a little different. Personally, I prefer lentils. Wheat. But the wheat I'm talking about is the hybridised wheat. The hybridised wheat of the day is very different from the original wheat. The original wheat that God made is called Enkenhorn. An Enkenhorn wheat, it had a very fragile structure. Fragile structure means very easy to digest. That's the protein or the gluten structure. It is not sure when, but it is estimated a few thousand years ago, Enkenhorn wheat did a wild hybrid with a field grass and created the Emma wheat. And this has a fairly fragile structure, not quite as fragile gluten or protein structure as the Enkenhorn, but fairly fragile. And then a wild hybrid from the Emma was spelt. And spelt also has retained the fairly fragile structure. But it was the Emma wheat that went through intensive crossbreeding to produce the hybridised wheat of today. And the hybridisation of that wheat created a very complex protein or gluten structure. And it's almost only the cast iron gut that can break down that down effectively. But if that wheat is made into a flour and is baked in the sourdough method or prepared in the sourdough method, that breaks that gluten structure down and makes it even more fragile. That's the beauty of the sourdough bread, is it breaks down the protein or the gluten structure. And if the spelt flour is made into a sourdough, it breaks down that gluten structure to the original very fragile structure. If someone is celiac, they can't handle any of these because they cannot handle gluten at all. So they can eat the simple needs bread, which is sourdough gluten-free. If someone's gluten sensitive or gluten intolerant, they can usually handle the Enkenhorn, the Emma or the spelt, but not the hybridised. The most common symptoms of an intolerance to wheat is brain fog, bloating. It can also, some people react with diarrhea. It can also be rashes. So that explains why we see so much gluten intolerance today. The wheat was changed. So when you look at the time frame, I think it was 1976, Dr. Norman Bullock got a Nobel Prize for his hybridised wheat. So by the end of the 70s, this wheat's going worldwide. Farmers loved it because they were getting 6 to 8 times more grain per acre. That's 6 to 8 times more money per acre. I was talking to a farmer recently. He said, this is interesting. He said, I'd like to start growing some of this. I said, I'm very pleased to hear that. But I said, you won't get as much money. He said, that's not what interests me. Don't you love to hear that? Yes, we've got to pay our bills, but you know, the Bible doesn't say money is the root of all evil. It says love of money is the root of all evil. Yeah, we've got to pay our bills. But there's becoming an awareness of this because so many people are struggling with the wheat. In fact, some people are struggling and don't even know they are. They just think the brain fog and the bloating is just age. Poor old age gets blamed for so many things. I've got a friend, she's a medical doctor, and she retired a few years ago at the age of 78. She said, 40 years ago you never heard of gluten intolerance. 20 years it was just starting to be heard. Today, if you want to talk about a true pandemic, wouldn't it be gluten intolerance? So one of the reasons is the change in the wheat. Another reason is wheat is sprayed with Roundup, and that locks up a lot of the minerals in the soil, so we're not getting the nutrients out of the food. Plus, most people are just overdoing it. Cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea, pretzels, donuts, mid-morning, mid-afternoon. That's almost 100% wheat diet. And as we looked at yesterday, there's no colour there. There's no colour in that food. Do you remember what Walt said? Digestion doesn't start when we eat. It starts with our eyes, our ears, our smell. It's all messages going to the brain, getting ready to take that food in. And it's also, for some people, quite a surprise how much activity starts in the mouth. That's why put your knife and fork down between the meal and look outside. Chew, chew, chew. A friend of mine, with their kids, they pretend to all be steam trains. Choo, 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 choo. I know my husband, he does everything fast, everything done fast. Drives fast, and that's perfectly fine because I like fast. But he eats too fast. So often at the mealtime, he's got so much on his plate, literally, and so much he's doing. So often I just touch his arm and smile, and he goes, ah. Starts to chew. Just needs a little reminder. Because there's no teeth anywhere else, is there? So I always think, we love eating, why do we rush it? Enjoy, masticate very well. So looking at what must stop, because it all creates an acid environment. Also, alcohol. It's not a food, but it certainly creates a very acid environment in the body. Tobacco's not a food, but it also creates an acid environment. Drugs are not foods, but people who are taking recreational drugs or on medication, it does create an acid environment. Caffeine. Oh, this is good. There was no groan this time. So remember, just half a teaspoon of coffee, half a teaspoon of Roma. I think it's Roma. You've got a few here, yeah? Alternatives to caffeine. And you can, little by little, get off your caffeine. Also, grains other than a few that we're going to look at when we look at the alkaline side. So let's list them now. The alkaline grains are millet. And we had millet the other day. My grandsons love millet. But remember with millet, when you cook it like a porridge, 1 cup of millet to 4 cups of water. And that's a nice one that you can do overnight. And my grandchildren love millet. They put some organic soy milk in, a teaspoon of honey, chop banana all over, sprinkle the chia seeds on it. Yeah, 1 cup of millet to 4 cups of water. It takes a lot of water. Also buckwheat, and I tasted a little buckwheat in the waffles this morning. Buckwheat has a strong flavour, but and I'm sure that they balanced it out with a few other things. Buckwheat pancakes is a nice way to get familiar with buckwheat. I know the Polish love it. Aussies aren't that keen on it, but you just ease in it because it has a strong flavour. But it's an alkaline grain. Spelt is an alkaline grain, and that's the wild or field hybrid from the original wheat. And also another one is amaranth. And amaranth is a tiny, tiny grain. And it's not really nice cooked up by itself because it goes like glue. But you could put a little amaranth in with your millet when you make that. You can mix it with other grains. Quinoa, spelt quinoa. It's also what's considered an alkaline grain. All your other grains sit here. So yes, rice sits here. Yes, oatmeal sits here. And legumes. There are 3 legumes that have an alkaline effect, so I'll put them here. One is soy, and as we looked at yesterday, soy is only a problem if it's been genetically modified or grown with poisons. Soy and lima beans, they're a big white bean, they're quite delicious, and lentils. Whether it be red, whether it be green or brown, they are the alkaline beans. Nuts. There are 2 nuts that have an alkaline effect. One is the almond. An almond is called the king of all nuts because the almond is high in protein, it's high in iron, and it's also an alkaline nut. Brazil nuts. In our last class, we looked at the wonders of Brazil nuts and how phenomenally high they are in that very important mineral, selenium. I aim to have Brazil nuts every morning and almonds every morning. They're the 2 nuts that I aim to have every morning. So looking back at our abstain list, these are the things that we should keep away from, but I'll do a red on the things to keep away from, which is this section here, whereas this section here, they can be eaten, but not in huge amounts. Inhale through the nose, because when you inhale through the nose, you will be getting more oxygen, and oxygen alkalizes. Mouth breathers can create an acid environment in the body. Nutrition. We're going to explore nutrition in a little bit more detail in a minute when we explore the alkaline side. Moderation in all the good things. Moderation, especially in this little section here. And exercise. Most people don't do enough exercise. Yes, you can over-exercise, and that will create a little bit too much lactic acid that can create an acid environment. But as you can see by this, keeping these basic laws of health helps to maintain this 6.5 environment. Now, I don't know about you, but some of my family and friends break every law every day. I know one friend of mine, never in the sunshine because I think they're going to get skin cancer. They think they're getting a lot of water with their cups of coffee and tea. They're going to bed, probably the earliest night would be midnight. And this lady I know, she does not believe in God. She's a scientist. So no faith in God, just lives very much on the abstain side. I haven't noticed in detail, but I'm sure she's a mouth breather, having a lot of acid-forming foods. And their largest meal is the end of the day, and no time to exercise. See, what's happening in that situation, the lungs and the kidneys are trying as hard as they can, but then they have a cup of coffee or a can of Coke. And oh no, the scales tip. And blood pH starts to drop, 7.34, 7.33, 7.32. Alarm bells go off. And the last resort buffer system is called on. What's that? What's the most alkaline mineral? Calcium. It's pulled out of its biggest storage house. Where's that? The bones. It's pulled out in a form of calcium phosphate, comes into the blood, immediately balances it. 7.33, 34, 35. Whew. We're safe. But at a cost. What's the cost? The bones are getting weaker. The teeth are getting weaker. But there's another cost. We've now got free calcium excess floating through the blood. What's the body going to do with that? Oh, it'll dump it in our kidneys as kidney stones, in our gallbladder as gallstones. It'll actually contribute to the build-up on the arteries. It'll dump it on our bone as a bone spur. And if you go to the doctor and you've got a painful lump on your wrist, and you'll say to him, "What's that?" He'll say, "It's a bone spur." And if you say to him, "Well, why is the calcium deposited on my bone and not in my bone?" And unless he'd studied nutrition, he'll say, "We're not sure. We think it could be genetics." They can't blame a germ for that one. Genetics may load the gun, but it is lifestyle that pulls the trigger. But you can break up a bone spur with castor oil compresses. If the bone spur has been there 3 years, it might take 3 months. If the bone spur's been there 3 months, it might take 3 weeks. If the bone spur's been there 3 weeks, it might only take 3 days. Just keep doing it, keep doing it. You've got nothing to lose. Little by little, it'll break it down. So let's have a look at the alkaline side. And you might be surprised to know that the most alkaline mineral, the most alkaline food we can put into our body is the lemon. And you might say, no, the lemon is acid. It's acid where it should be. What's the only acid part of our body? Stomach. So it's a great digestive aid. And if you investigate what's in the salad dressings we've been eating, they've all got lemon juice in them. So lemon juice is a great digestive aid because the stomach should be acid. But when the stomach's broken down and dispersed into our body, it's high in the alkaline minerals, which is calcium and magnesium and potassium and also iron. They're the alkaline minerals. There's one more. It's hidden in my brain. It'll come out in a minute. So the effect that these foods have on our body all is dependent on the minerals that are in the foods. And that's why the best organic farmer feeds the soil. Because if the soil's fed, and they use the non-hybrid seeds. We've got quite a few non-hybrid seed companies in Australia. And you know, in our vegetable garden, most of the weeds are vegetables. Because when it goes to seed, it's all through the ground. I remember one day, some of our kale plants went to seed, and we hoed up the ground, and I went away for a week, came back, and I saw a carpet of purple. Millions of kale plants. They came up like weeds. That's also the beauty of the non-hybrid seeds. So the lemon is high in the alkaline minerals. That's why it has an alkalizing effect on the tissues. Dark green leafy vegetables. I'm sure you're not here. You're not surprised to hear me say that. We've been talking a lot about dark green leafy vegetables. There it is again. And if you're finding it hard to get greens into your kids, they love green smoothies, especially if you put some banana and some mango in it. And as Walt said, and as from Agatha Thrash, you mix your fruits and your vegetables, you create a tornado. So how can you have green smoothies? Well, leaves are considered herbs. So your leafy greens, those spinaches and kales, and I know in South you have collard greens and lamb's quarters. In fact, I was in the garden recently, and it was at the organic farm, and I said, "Oh, there's fat hen." And they looked at me and said, "No, that's lamb's quarters." Now, we weren't going to have a fight over it. But in Australia, I didn't think we had lamb's quarters, but we call it fat hen. I know in Fiji, they cook it like a spinach. So those dark green leafy vegetables, you put that in a smoothie with banana and mango, the kids will drink it. It's a good way to get the greens in. So dark green leafy vegetables are phenomenally high in those minerals. So all your vegetables have an alkaline effect. But there is an exception. So what do I mean by exception? This is the nightshade group of vegetables. So this is tomato and eggplant. They're from the nightshade family. And also bell pepper. And the last one is potato. Not the sweet potato. The sweet potato is not a potato. It's actually a yam. Sodium. I tell you what, my brain wouldn't rest till I got it. Do you know, if you can't remember something, it's not because you're getting old, it's in there somewhere. Have you seen how much kids forget? In fact, I said to one 19-year-old guy who kept forgetting things, I said, what do you blame? Because all my friends blame the fact that they're 50. But it's there. I just had to pull it out. There it is. Sodium is an alkaline mineral. So these are the nightshade group of vegetables. I have a question mark there because for some people they have an acid effect. For some people they have an alkaline effect. Why is that? These foods are relatively high in a plant chemical called lectins. Have you heard of lectins? Dr. Stephen Gundry, he wrote a book called The Plant Paradox. You know why his book's called The Plant Paradox? Because he claims that so many plants are so high in lectins, we should all be on the carnivore diet. Now, I'll tell you something interesting, how God got me to read that book. I left America, I think it was 2022, and it was by a miracle of God I even got on the plane. I remember going, because you couldn't get into Australia unless you were vaccinated. But I'm an Australian. They can't keep Australians out of Australia. So I went and gave my boarding pass, and she said, where's your vaccine pass? And I shook my head. And then I held up my negative COVID test. She looked at me. She could see she was a bit perplexed. She said, do you have an exemption? I said, yeah. She said, oh, get on, go on. I don't even know what that meant. And if she'd said, show me your exemption, I was going to say, I have an exemption from the great God of heaven that I will not put anything into my body that will harm it. I don't know if I would have got away with it, but anyway, I got on. But when I got home, I was treated as if I had the plague. I was put in a bus, me, myself and I, on the biggest bus I've ever seen. Military took my bags. Police were there. It's just mad, isn't it? And when they took me to the where I was going to be in solitary confinement, my husband said, I thought that had been banned. Anyway, they took me to a hotel and they had to go out. The military had to stop the people on the footpath for me, myself and I to come off the bus and cross the footpath. My husband said I should have gone like this. And they put me into a room and I was not allowed out of that room for 2 weeks. They delivered my food, they knocked on the door. I wasn't allowed to open the door for 3 minutes. How crazy is that? Anyway, my husband says, if you're looking for common sense at this time, you will not find it. But just before I got on the plane in America, a lady gave me a book, The Plant Paradox by Stephen Gundry. So I'm in a room for 2 weeks and I've got a book. I picked up the book, I started to read it, and I just got so annoyed. He's claiming it took 20 million years for our tongue to develop and 20,000, I don't know, all this. Close the book, put it aside, but I'm in a room for 2 weeks. I'd look at the book again, open the book, and I thank God I read it. And I can see God's plan. Have you watched God's plan in your life? Do you know the perfect timing of certain places at certain times? It is no accident that you are even here this week. So I had the book. So I opened it again. I think if I'd gone home, I don't think I would have read it. But I kept reading it. And he's talking about lectins. And I thought, God put lectins in food. Why? Why did he put lectins in food? And as I read, I discovered, I read this book through God's eyes. I said, Father in heaven, give me wisdom. Why did you put lectins in foods? You see, if lectins get into the blood, they increase inflammation big time. But I wanted to know more. And then I discovered that lectins are very high in unripe fruit. The birds know more than us. They don't eat the green tomatoes, do they? They peck the ripe tomatoes. They don't eat the green figs. They peck the ripe figs. And that bitterness in the unripe fruit is lectins. It's actually a message saying, don't eat this because it's high in lectins. Well, that made sense to me. And then lectins is very high in legumes. But if you soak and rinse, bring it to the boil, rinse again, and cook it well, in a pressure cooker especially, it kills the lectins. Long, slow cooking and rinsing away that dirty water, get rid of the lectins. Gluten is a lectin. But if you make your flour into sourdough bread, it disarms the lectins. I started to get excited. I thought, we can eat plants, just prepare them properly. Oats. Oats are high in lectins, but if you do what the Scottish did, which is soak them all day and put them on the corner of the wood stove all night, disarms the lectins. There's a book called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon, and she looks at all the traditional ways of preparing food. And those traditional ways of preparing foods disarm the lectins. And traditionally, the Europeans, they always de-seeded and de-skinned the tomatoes and the eggplants. And guess where the lectins are? In the seeds and the skins. So the traditional way of preparing food disarms the lectins. And here's something else very exciting about the lectins. If you've got good gut flora, it will disarm the lectins. So maybe you didn't cook your oats enough, or maybe you didn't sourdough your grain, and some lectins come through, your gut flora will disarm them. So if we've got good gut flora and we're cooking in the right way, we don't have to worry about lectins. So when I finished the book, I said, thank you, Father in heaven, for making me read that book. Because now I can explain to people there's no need to stop legumes and grains as long as you prepare them in the proper way. And include cultured food as part of your diet. Sauerkraut, yogurts, kimchis, all the cultured foods. And boost your gut flora and keep away from the antibiotics. I believe antibiotics should be kept only as life-saving. I raised 8 children without antibiotics and they're all still alive. Got that? They're all still alive. Because the body's been designed to heal itself. You just need to give it the right conditions. So we do not need to fear lectins. But what I have found, if someone has arthritis or gout, they are best stopping the nightshade group of vegetables because they can have an inflammatory effect, and it's to do with the lectins. Something interesting, and I mentioned this the other day, when you cook tomato with olive oil, and I think you'll agree with me, they go together very nicely, and you keep it on a low heat, because when you cook the oil with a fluid, it prevents it going to a high heat that will destroy it. And what did the Italians and the Lebanese traditionally? Beautiful, rich tomato sauces, and they cook it slow. They cook it slow, and they cook it with the olive oil, and that releases lycopene. And lycopene is a fat soluble. It comes from the vitamin A. So the fat-soluble vitamins need us to eat vegetables with fat to help us get those vitamin A's. Another reason why the fat-free diet's a crazy diet. And doesn't it taste magnificent? That nice, slow, long cooking. Lycopene is a potent antioxidant that has the ability to reduce the inflammation of the prostate gland. So ladies, serve your husbands and your sons a cooked tomato and olive oil dish at least 3 times a week. And how nice when you put it with kidney beans, there's your Mexican tacos. When you put it with your lentils, you can make dals. In fact, I think in my book, Self-Heal by Design, I've got a chickpea with a rich tomato sauce. Moving on, at our alkaline foods, also is seeds. There are 2 alkaline grains that are lectin-free. So the 2 lectin-free grains are millet, and I'm looking for some room here, sorghum. I find sorghum an interesting one because in Australia, sorghum was only ever grown for the cows. But then they discovered it's gluten-free. It's gluten-free because it's lectin-free. So now you can buy sorghum for humans. In fact, you can buy sorghum flour. It's quite nice. Of course, it's gluten-free because gluten is a lectin. Where does fruit sit? Fruit sits on the alkaline side. But fruit, as I mentioned earlier, is high in fibre, high in minerals, low in minerals, high in sugars. But those huge strawberries that I saw on the strawberry plant in that biological organic farm last week, they would be probably 10 times the minerals that you would find in the conventionally grown strawberries. And I talked to Joe. Joe's in his 80s. Joe's the young guy who at the age of 16 said to his father, I don't want to mix these chemicals anymore. And his father gave him 5 acres. And that's how the organic farm started, then 20 acres. He said, we used to spend a fortune on chemicals. We don't spend 1 cent now. Vegetables are high in fibre, high in minerals, low in sugars. Fruit as a whole are high in fibre, high in sugars, low in minerals, but your organic, of course, comes up a little bit higher. I hate to rub this out, but I do need a bit more room to explain what I'm about to explain to you. If someone has a yeast problem in their body and they're eating a lot of fruit, the sugar in the fruit feeds the yeast, and the yeast gives off acetic acid. The yeast gives off lactic acid. The yeast gives off uric acid. And so if someone has a yeast problem in their body and they're eating a lot of fruit, it just feeds that 5.5 environment. It creates the environment that the cancer thrives in, that the fungus thrives in. And I did read the book Grape Cure. She just had grapes. But you know what she did eat? They were organic grapes, so they were higher in minerals, and the seeds. And also the seeds. And yes, the fruit is cleansing. But if someone has a yeast presence, then eating a high fruit diet, I don't suggest eliminating fruit, just keep it low GI. And we looked at that when we looked at diabetes, so all your berries are low GI, which means it slowly releases the glucose. Also, it gives off alcohol. The question is often asked is about vinegar. We don't use vinegar. The only time we advocate vinegar is to pour on the toes if the person has a yeast infection like athlete's foot tinea. But what happens with vinegar is it gives off a substance called acetaldehyde. And what's acetaldehyde? Acetaldehyde is a neurotoxin. Sorry, that's E. Neurotoxin. What's a neurotoxin? A neurotoxin kills brain cells. That's acetaldehyde. Where can we get acetaldehyde? Vinegar is high in acetaldehyde, and the reason why people aren't getting apparent brain damage and they're eating vinegar is they're not eating a lot. Also, alcohol is acetaldehyde. Vinegar is actually only one process short of alcohol. What also gives off acetaldehyde is cigarette smoke fumes, so I'll just say smoke. What also gives off acetaldehyde is car fumes. And if someone's got a yeast presence and they're eating a lot of fruit, because it feeds the yeast, it also, through the alcohol, gives off acetaldehyde. If you want to explore this in more detail, you can look up Dr. Robert Young. Dr. Robert Young has got an excellent paper on vinegar and acetaldehyde. Apparently, Dr. Robert Young is in prison at the moment. You know, they put a lot of good health writers in prison, don't they? I don't know what's happening with him at the moment, but he's written some excellent books on the acid-alkaline balance in the body. And this explains why all our salad dressings have lemon juice and not vinegar in them. To maintain this 6.5 environment, we should be consuming 20 to 30% alkaline foods. And they should be coming from this section here. And we should be having, ideally, 70 to 80% alkaline-forming foods. This ratio will maintain this 6.5 pH in the body. One of the easiest ways to do this is just to eat more greens, start pursuing other grains. That's an easy way to do it. It's not that oats are bad, it's not that rice is bad. You just don't eat a whole plate of rice. You have maybe 20 to 30% of your plate can be rice. And it's not that walnuts are bad, it's not that macadamia nuts are bad. No, it's just the ratio. But when you consider what foods have an acid effect and what foods have an alkaline effect, what would most Americans be eating? I'd like to suggest, well, I'll say Australians, they're pretty close. 90% acid, would that be right? Maybe 10% alkaline? No wonder we're sick. No wonder we're sick. The lungs and the kidneys do a wonderful job at keeping the pH of our blood where it should be, but we are the ones that choose by the way we eat and the way we drink, actually the pH of our cell. And this is why juicing is such a great way to start, because it alkalizes. And it's a great way to shift direction in your life, is attending the retreats where you'll have a few days on juices. You know, we've had a few guests say, does your food taste amazing, or is it just because we haven't eaten for 2 days? So I like to think it's a bit of both. Maybe a bit of both, because God gave us taste buds for a reason. And unfortunately, so many people have stopped the salt and stopped the oil, and they make the food taste good. Or they're eating the wrong oil or the wrong salt. In my book, Self-Heal by Design, I have a chapter on the acid-alkaline balance, and in my book, Sustain Me, I have a chapter on arthritis. And in the book on arthritis, I do include the acid-alkaline, because we have seen many people heal from arthritis by starting to, through the Sustain Me principles, hydrate their body, ease off the acid-forming foods, go over to mostly alkaline-forming foods, wear castor oil compresses on the aching joints, and little by little we see them heal. We have even seen arthritic swollen joints go back to normal. Obviously not in a week, but little by little by little. What an incredible body we live in, with this inbuilt ability to heal. So we have a break now, is that right? Yes, break time. So we'll come back later. Thank you.